Trick-or-treating can't be that dangerous, right? Right? At least that's what I used to think, before that incident. See, everyone takes it for granted that they receive candy from strangers during Halloween. People just assume that everyone is happy to participate in the festive spirit. And it's just jolly good fun all around. But not me. Not anymore. Not after that night. I was 14 at the time, excited as ever for Halloween. I'd been working on my costume for weeks. I couldn't wait to put it on. When the day finally came, I was up before everyone else, bouncing around the house with anticipation. I slipped into my Cinderella costume, complete with little glass slippers. My mom, a tailor, had let me help her make the dress, and it was perfect. I felt like an actual princess. "Calm down, Melinda. Halloween's not going anywhere," my mom laughed, shaking her head. "I know, but I have to go now," I shot back with a grin, grabbing my candy bag. She waved me off as I ran down the street, my heart racing with excitement. I breezed through the houses on our block, collecting heaps of candy from all our smiling neighbors. My bag was nearly full in no time. It was Halloween after all. Along the way, I met up with Alice and Julie, my two best friends from school. "Let's hit the next block," Alice suggested. I hesitated. My mom had told me to stay on our street, but it was still daylight. What could possibly go wrong? We crossed over to the next block, where the houses were decorated even more eerily. Jack-o'-lanterns, fake cobwebs, and tombstones lined the front yard. It was perfect. When we came to an older house with a gravestone and skeleton hand poking out of the ground, we couldn't resist. "Wow, this one's creepy," I said. Alice knocked on the door, and we waited. A tall man, dressed as Freddy Krueger, opened the door with a wide, unnerving smile. His costume was on point, complete with makeup that made his skin look burnt and scarred. "Trick or treat!" we yelled in unison. "Well, hello there, you lovely girls," he said, his deep and raspy voice. He dropped handfuls of candy into our bags, smiling the whole time. But I couldn't figure out why. We were about to leave when he suddenly rushed back inside. "Wait! Take some more candy," he called, coming back with even bigger handfuls. Alice and July giggled with excitement, but my unease only deepened. "Let's go," I said, tugging them away. We were a few feet down the road when he shouted after us, "Make sure to enjoy every last bite." There was something off about his tone. But we shrugged it off and kept going, our bags now overflowing with sweets. Eventually, we called it a day and headed home. When I got back, my mom and I dumped my candy onto the kitchen table. I tore open a few wrappers and started munching. I had just picked up a Jolly Rancher, about to pop it into my mouth, when my mom lunged at me. "Melinda, stop!" she cried, slapping the candy out of my hand. "Mom, what's wrong?" I began, but then I saw it. Lying on the floor, glinting in the light, was a needle. My heart raced and my stomach churned as I realized there wasn't just one. There were half a dozen needles scattered across the floor. My mom grabbed the rest of the candy bag and emptied it onto the table. She tore through the wrappers frantically, and with each candy she opened, my horror grew. Nearly every Jolly Rancher had a sewing needle embedded inside it. "Where did you get this candy?" she demanded, her voice shaking as she grabbed my shoulders. I don't know," I stammered. "Think, Melinda, you have to remember," she insisted. My mind raced, then it hit me like a cold wave. "There was a man," I muttered. "What man? Where? Who were you with?" she pressed. "Alice and July," I replied. My mom, pale, immediately picked up the phone, calling their houses to warn them. As she made the calls, I sat there, staring at the needles in disbelief. My mind kept drifting back to that man's creepy smile and his parting words. "Make sure to enjoy every last bite." Thankfully, neither Alice nor July had eaten their candy yet, but I'll never forget that night, or the chill that settled in my bones. I haven't been the same since. This story is based on a real-life event that happened in a small town in Massachusetts, where needles were found in every candy a child brought home after trick-or-treating. It's a chilling reminder that not everyone has good intentions, even during the holidays, as seemingly harmless as Halloween. Always be cautious, because something as innocent as candy can turn into a nightmare. I was kidnapped by my neighbor last Halloween. I know this is a crazy way to start a story, but stay with me. It will all make sense soon enough. I was 14 when this happened, and if you had told me that sweet Miss Radcliffe was capable of doing something so horrible, I'd have called you a liar. I guess it just goes to show that people often wear masks in public and hide their true selves behind them. That Halloween, I was dressed as a ghost. Basic, I know, but I really wasn't feeling the whole vibe. I think I was getting too old for the usual costumes and candy stuff that kids normally love about Halloween. Maybe that's why I didn't make an effort. Do I have to? I complained to my aunt. She was asking me to go out trick-or-treating. I had told her that I didn't want any candy, but she was insisting that I go out anyway. Come on, Candace, just a few sweets for Caroline, she implored. But we already have a lot of candy, I countered, pointing to the mountain of sweets that lay on the table. You know she won't eat it. She wants candy from outside, my aunt said patiently. Fine, I sighed in defeat, and Aunt Esme smiled at me. Caroline was my cousin, my Aunt Esme's daughter. She was 6 years old, and had always been sickly ever since she was born, so at times she couldn't go outside. It was my luck that Halloween was one of those days, so, like a good cousin, I took one of the baskets and went trick-or-treating. The front of our house was full of mannequins and jack-o'-lanterns. Caroline had dragged me along, and together we turned Aunt Esme's nice suburban house into a house of horrors. I felt a twinge of pride despite myself. I was standing there in the red glow of sunset, thinking about where to go when an idea hit me. I don't have to go far to get candy. Miss Radcliffe, right next door, was bound to have lots of candy stocked up for the kids, and she really liked having me around. So I could just hang out at her place for maybe a half an hour and then go back home with a basket full of candy. Aren't I a genius? My plan set, I crossed the road to Miss Radcliffe's house. It was decorated sparsely compared to others. Ever since her grandson had drowned a year before, there had been fewer and fewer signs of life in her yard during the holidays. Miss Radcliffe? I called out when I reached her door. There was no answer, so I made my way inside. I figured she wouldn't mind. Her place was like a second home for me and Caroline. The inside of her house was a mess. It looked like it hadn't been cleaned in days, and there was a sickening stench permeating through the entire room, the smell of death and decay. I brought my hand to my nose. What the hell was that? Miss Radcliffe? I called out again, but there was no answer. I kept walking until I made it into her living room, and froze in my tracks. The entire living room looked like it had been the set of Supernatural. The coffee table was gone, and the floor was a pentagram drawn in what looked like red paint. There were black candles set at each and every point of the pentagram, their soft glow casting into the room into an eerie light. What the hell? I thought as my breath caught in my throat. I moved my eyes up from the ground, and I almost fainted when I saw Miss Radcliffe. She was wearing a long black robe, and holding some shadowy object in her hand. Her face looked different. There was none of the warmth I had gotten used to. She looked like a totally different person. I wanted to run away, to flee from this woman who had almost felt like family to me. My mind wanted to understand what was happening, but my body just wanted me to get out of there. Miss Radcliffe? The response that came was not what I expected. She roared like a mad animal and advanced towards me. I panicked. I turned to run away, but I slipped on a stool I hadn't noticed when I came in. I fell with a painful thud. Miss Redcliffe stood over me, her eyes empty like twin entrances to Hades. I wanted to scream, to tell her to cut it out, that her prank wasn't funny, but my mouth stayed shut. I raised my hand in front of me. That's when I noticed the blood coating my hand. I didn't remember getting cut. I wasn't feeling any pain. With a sinking feeling, I realized the blood wasn't mine. I glanced at the pentagram again. It wasn't red paint at all. The symbol was drawn in blood. "It will be over soon," Miss Redcliffe spoke softly. "What are you doing?" I began, before I noticed what she was holding. The decapitated head of her dog, Mr. Fluffers. It had an army of flies swarming around it. That's where the stench was coming from. Mrs. Redfield reached into her pocket and took out a butcher's knife. She stood over me with the knife, poised to stab downwards. I closed my eyes. Seconds passed. Nothing happened. I slowly opened my eyes and saw Mrs. Redcliffe slumping down, whimpering as tears streamed from her face. "I'm sorry, Peter. I can't do it. I'm sorry." Peter had been her grandson, who died last year. He and I had been friends. I didn't waste my chance. I got up and left the weeping woman on the floor. When I made it home, I ran to my aunt's arms and started crying. It took her close to an hour to get the story of what happened out of me. We later learned that Mrs. Redcliffe hadn't been well for a while, and in the following weeks, she was taken to an institution. That was a year ago, but sometimes I catch myself wondering, what if she hadn't broken down in the middle of whatever ritual she wanted to carry out? What would have happened to me? I sat alone in my cabin, enjoying a nice meal of sausage, beans, and bread. Outside, the night was dark and starless. In the distance, I could hear the sound of loud music. The Halloween festivities were starting. It would have been nice to have someone to celebrate with, but all my children were far, far away, and rarely ever visited. I pushed my plate away, sighing, when I heard it. A soft, tentative knock at my door. I got up with a groan, feeling the effort in my old bones. I always kept a bag of candy towards Halloween because I knew the kids would come for trick-or-treating, but it still annoyed me. "I'm coming, just wait 1 second," I shouted, reaching for a handful of candy from the bag. But as I opened the door, I found nothing but the inky blackness of the night. I stood there for a few seconds before deciding that it would probably been my imagination. Stuff like that happens when you're old. I chuckled as I went back to my cabin and settled onto my chair. The knock came again. "Damn it!" I barked, realizing it hadn't been my imagination. I figured it was probably some of the neighborhood kids playing tricks on me. I hated these kinds of pranks. "Is anyone there?" I shouted into the darkness, irritation palpable in my voice. "Stop messing with me," I roared into the night. "You think this is funny?" My voice was met with silence. Part of me was angry, but another part began to feel the chill of fear creeping into my bones. With a swift motion, I grabbed the shotgun I kept under my bed and went back to the door. "Whoever you are, I'm not playing with you," I shouted, holding my shotgun tightly. The darkness said nothing back. I was about to go back into the house when I saw them. 2 children stood at the edge of my porch, their figures clad in Victorian-style clothing, both dressed in white and smiling eerily at me. "Have you been messing with my door?" I asked, my voice trembling. They remained silent, their smiles unnaturally wide, as if frozen in that state. "Do you want some candy?" I offered, holding out the bag. I hated that my voice was cracking. I was 70 years old, for Christ's sake. Why was I afraid of 2 kids in costumes? "Why won't you speak?" I demanded, desperation laced in my tone. I could feel my grip on the shotgun tightening, knuckles white from the effort. The two children just continued to stare at me for a couple more minutes before they suddenly turned on their heels and started walking away. I watched dumbfounded as they walked slowly towards my neighbor's yard, opened the gate, and vanished inside. I breathed a sigh of relief and went back inside my cabin, laughing at myself. The kids were probably pulling a Halloween prank on me, and like some old idiot, I had fallen for it. I went to sleep that night with a smile. Morning found me refreshed. The memory of the previous night was the first thing on my mind. As I made my way to the neighbor's house, I spotted her tending to her flowers. She looked up and offered a friendly smile. "Morning, Mr. Jenkins," she called, her voice warm and welcoming. "Good morning," I replied, flashing her a smile. "Your kids sure scared me last night." Her smile faltered. "My kids?" she echoed, confused, knitting her brow. "What do you mean?" "You know, the two in white. They were trick-or-treating. They knocked on my door a couple of times." She shook her head, her confused look deepening. "My kids haven't been around for a month, Mr. Jenkins, and they are certainly too old to be trick-or-treating. In fact, nobody was here last night." My heart plummeted as her words washed over me. "What do you mean?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "Both Carly and James are 17. They wouldn't be caught dead trick-or-treating. They're at their grandfather's house in Idaho. That's where they were yesterday." The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and shaking. "But I saw the children enter." I insisted. My mind was racing back in their pale faces and hollow smiles. "They were right here." "Mr. Jenkins, are you all right?" she asked, concern flooding her features. "I'm fine," I snapped, anger bubbling beneath my fear. But the words faltered suddenly. I wasn't sure what I had seen anymore. I knew there was no point in arguing with her. If she said her kids were anywhere, then that was the truth. She had no reason to lie to me. I was about to open my mouth to apologize when my eyes were drawn to one of her windows. The blood froze in my veins. Peering at me from behind the curtain was two ghostly children with their eerie smiles. I screamed. When I woke up in the hospital, all my kids were there to see me. Apparently, I had collapsed. It turned out the children I had seen were real. They were my neighbor's nephews and niece, who had come to their house on Halloween with her sister. Their mother had a key, so they just let themselves in. My neighbor didn't know that they were there. That's why she told me there was no kids at her house. I still laugh whenever I think about it. Those naughty kids had almost killed an old man.